Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, so we've got two schools here. We've got Bozeman and Lone Peak, and those are who are connected where we can see you. And we also have a couple schools. We've got a Flathead Valley homeschool. We also have Fergus, I think, out there, and MCPS Willard Alternative right here in Missoula. So we can't see all of you, but welcome, even for those of you who can't see. My name is Amy Ryan. I'm with the Montana World Affairs Council. And with a grant from the Washington Foundation, we've been able to connect you all with our amazing speaker that we have here today. And for the teachers out there, we do this periodically as part of our Council in the Classroom program. So we'd love to continue doing this with all of you, and it's a lot of fun. And we're really privileged that you've given us your time this afternoon, and we have an interesting topic for you. So we can get started. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Sarah Symons. She's the co-founder and executive director of Made by Survivors, an international nonprofit fighting human trafficking and slavery with empowerment, education, and employment. Made by Survivors serves over 1,000 slavery survivors and their children in India, Nepal, Cambodia, Thailand, Ghana, and Fiji. Ms. Symons and her husband, John Berger, the CEO of Made by Survivors, started the organization in 2005 with their own money and the contributions of a few concerned friends. Projects include vocational training in highly paid, respected professionals, such as metalsmithing and accounting, education sponsorship for children freed from slavery, shelter building, and entrepreneurship training. Prior to starting MBS, Symons worked both in the nonprofit and the business worlds. From 1994 to 2006, Sarah worked as a composer of TV music and as a recording artist. Prior to that, she served as program director and artist in residence for Creative Arts Workshop, which is a program serving homeless kids in New York City. In 2010, she received the Watson Foundation Entrepreneurship Award and the Count Me In Micro to Millions Award for Women Entrepreneurs. So we have a true guest. She's been in Missoula, or a true honor. She's been in Missoula for the last couple days as part of a human trafficking conference that have brought people from all over the world to share on this issue. So it's such an honor to have you, and we're really excited. And without further ado, Sarah Symons. So enjoy.
Awesome, thank you. I am really glad to be talking to you guys today. I really like talking about this issue with young people because this really is an issue. The people that are most affected by it are young people. Teenagers and even younger, kids younger than you are the people that are most affected by human trafficking, and also the people who I think are going to be able to move this movement forward in the future and really be the ones to see the end of slavery in your lifetime. So I always think it's a huge honor, and I'm really glad to be here. So first of all, what is modern slavery? I'm sure you guys have probably seen representations of it on like CSI or on the on news programs. And I know that I've seen a lot of that, but a lot of times those news coverage kind of gives you a slanted view of the situation. Like you see this one very tragic scenario, but what you really don't understand is this is a big issue in the world. According to the United Nations, there's currently between 20 and 30 million people who are slaves in the world. And that's more than at any time in human history. Like the whole middle passage of slavery from Africa to the Americas affected less people that are in slavery today. And I find that, actually very shameful on our world that we're still tolerating this slavery and allowing it to continue. In addition to slavery, there's some related issues that our organization also works on. And one of them is child labor, which affects probably about 200 million children in the world. And a lot of times, the line between child labor and slavery is very thin. And, there's a very fine line, and a lot of times people would be in one situation, and then something happens, ends up, then they're in slavery or they're back in child labor. So when someone's in child labor, they're really considered a very high risk also for going into full-on slavery. And another related issue that we work on is child marriage, which you really could look at, for someone being forced to be married at the age of 12 and to start having children is a pretty horrific human rights abuse and also a form of slavery. But just like child labor, it also makes you more vulnerable. So when we look at this issue of slavery, we try to look at it in the context with other related issues. Another issue that's heavily related with slavery is poverty. So many people that become victims of slavery, first, were living in extreme poverty, situations where they really had no opportunities to earn a living or to go to school, especially for girls. And so that is one of the reasons that made them extremely vulnerable, and we really need to address those issues. So what is modern slavery? I mean, we talked about how many people it affects and some related issues, but why are people trafficked? The answer is people are trafficked for a variety of reasons. One that you hear a lot about is for commercial sexual exploitation. Young girls and young women who are taken to brothels and forced to work there. And that's, a very particularly difficult type of slavery because it's so dangerous to the human being, to their spirit, to their body, to their health, and to their future. People are also trafficked a lot of times for labor. A lot of kids your age around the world are in slavery for to work in people's homes as maids, or boys for gardeners, or working in people's homes, also cleaning or taking care of children. And then there's a lot of industries like mining, brick making, steel, and farming, where there's a lot of slavery involved in those industries, and often affects very, very young children, starting up at about age 4. One of the programs that we're working on right now is to help families get out of that kind of labor slavery. And a lot of times the way people get into that kind of slavery is they owe a debt, a small debt, maybe $30 or $40, but they have no way to repay it. So they agree to go into what's called bonded labor, and ends up, the debt kind of gets larger because you get charged for your food. And the next thing you know, 10 years have passed and you and your children are just working and working away, and literally for a debt that was originally less than $50. And a lot of times in those situations, the people that are in it might not consider themselves slaves. And if you said you're in slavery, they'd be offended. They're not thinking of it that way. They don't know yet that they're not free. And of course, you guys have probably heard about child soldiers. Have you guys seen the movie Invisible Children? That kind of deals with that whole issue of child soldiers, which is a particularly big issue in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in South America, and where boys, and increasingly also girls, are forced to work as soldiers and to kill people, themselves to be hurt. And obviously it's an extremely traumatic form of slavery because, they're made to do these horrible things, and it really causes a tremendous trauma of the human being. So that's kind of what slavery is. And when I first found out about it, like I said, I was rather shocked. I was actually rather resistant. I had a completely different job. I used to write music for film and TV, and that was going pretty well. And I had a song that was put into a film, and that film was in a film festival in New York City. So I went down to the city, really excited. I knew my life was about to change, I was going to have my song in this movie was going to help my career. But while I was there, I saw a documentary called The Day My God Died. And you guys should check it out if you have a chance. It's online. And it's a movie about slavery between Nepal and India, of very young girls, typically age 11 to 14-year-old girls. And they came from rural villages in India, and they were trafficked, often by people they knew, over to India where they worked in brothels. And the movie kind of showed their journey, and also it showed some survivors who had been rescued out of the situation and were really making a huge impact. They'd created an underground railroad, and very bravely, they were going back into the places where they were exploited and pulling out other girls. And I saw that movie, and I said, at that time, my kids were very little. They were 2 and 3 at the time. I said, here I am. I'm a mom. I'm a songwriter. I live in Massachusetts. How am I going to do something about this? I don't know what to do. But here's these people who are survivors, and they seem to be managing to find a way to do something about it. So we have got to get behind them. And I was very inspired, and that was about 10 years ago. And coming out of that, I ended up contacting the groups in the movie, volunteering for them, and then going over to India and eventually starting my own nonprofit, which is called Made by Survivors. And I'm just going to pull up the website.
I'll help you.
Go to that.
The Chrome.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'll just kind of scroll through this. What our organization does is we work with people like this girl here after rescue, and we provide them with education and job opportunities, really good job opportunities, and safe housing so that they can remain safe and never really be at risk for being trafficked again. And one of the programs, as Amy was saying that we had, actually I don't know if you mentioned it, but one of our programs is that we train girls to be silversmiths, and they're some of the first women in India to do this kind of work, so it's very pioneering, and it gives them a really good income. And because, like I said, the poverty was a major reason why they were trafficked in the first place, empowering them and giving them opportunities is really important. And what the best thing about what we're doing is that we found is by helping these women, they then go out into their village and they save other people. A lot of them have been able to go and get their mother out of slavery, get their sister, help their little brothers, and they have, they have a good education, they have a good job, and proves their status in the community, and not only saves them from ever being trafficked again, but really enables them to go out and be able to change a lot of other people's lives. So that's a lot about me and what I'm doing. I want to hear from you guys, questions, thoughts on all of this.
Let's start with Bozeman.
Bozeman.
Well, I'd heard, just looking at like online statistics, apparently there is like there is human trafficking that goes on in the U.S. Do you know anything about that, I guess?
Yeah, I do. I'm really glad you brought that up. Human trafficking, I think a lot of us originally kind of think of it as a problem that's away, that's over there. Especially when I first got involved in it, there wasn't as much awareness that's also happening in the U.S. And it's happening in the U.S. in two different ways. One is that people are brought into the U.S. from other countries, usually poor countries like Korea or Mexico, Russia, and they're brought in and enslaved here in the U.S. And according to the State Department, there's about 20,000 people every year that are brought into the U.S. as slaves. But a bigger problem in terms of numbers is our U.S. kids, who are often kids that are coming out of foster care or are very vulnerable for other reasons. Maybe they've been abused in their family, and they are getting trafficked and used and abused, right here in our own country. Like one of the major issues is truck stops, and I think this is an issue in Montana. The truck stops have been a place where teens are brought and exploited, and they don't make any money from what's happening. It's very damaging to them. It's very, very, very unsafe for kids, obviously, and obviously it's just no way that any child should have to live. But according to the UN definition of human trafficking, it certainly does include a person in their own country is enslaved and controlled by another person. And the way they define that is if there's force, physical force, or fraud, like you're told there's a job for you in Cincinnati and you're going to make a lot of money as a waitress, and then you get there and you're trafficked. That's kind of fraud. And coercion, where another person manipulates you or threatens you, makes you feel like if you don't do this, we're going to hurt your family. And if any one of those three things is in place, then it's considered human trafficking. And so it doesn't have to include an international border. So that's a really good question. Thank you. Can we take another question?
If there is like an instance where the national government is benefiting from human trafficking, then how can we prevent that without like invading their sovereignty and rights?
What would be an example like what you're thinking of? Do you have an example in mind?
Well, I know that like North Korea has like labor camps that like take from like the national government actually benefits from human trafficking. So,
No, I think that's a very, very insightful question. I think it's delicate, right? And you have to weigh against trying to just go in and tell countries like this is illegal, we must stop it. And also, they do have their sovereignty, and that approach won't work. And especially with a country like North Korea, where relations are already kind of strained. So one of the tools that we have in our country is called the TIP report. And if you go to the State Department's website, state.gov, and you look up trafficking in persons, you can actually see this report. And it ranks every country in the world about their efforts to fight human trafficking. Are they doing nothing? Are they tolerating it? Are they encouraging it? Or are they taking steps to try to end it, and then give a ranking. And then some of the aid money that we give is affected by what their ranking is and whether they're trying to improve it. So it's a tool that can help. But I think it is a complicated issue, and especially, like I say, when you have other issues like aggression between countries that are also playing a role. And the other thing is, a lot of times when there is either war or social unrest within a country, or a breakdown of natural social, natural society, like say when you have a big tsunami hit, or when there's a huge earthquake, when any one of those things happens, that's when you start to see a rise of trafficking. So you got, when Haiti, I don't know, did you guys see in the news there were some cases of slavery right after the earthquake in Haiti? And that's a case where when natural things break down, when there's war, there's trafficking for war as soldiers, but there's also all different other kinds of trafficking that goes on because of, the law enforcement are being distracted by what's going on over here, and they're not looking here. And when I first got involved, my work was in Nepal, and they had a Maoist revolution that went on for 15 years, and just like all the law enforcement and all the money went to fighting those revolutionaries, and none of the money was going to prevent trafficking. And since that finally ended, and the country calmed down, actually we have seen some improvement. So that's one thing to look for, like if you want to work in this area, is to look for, when you see a country having one of those issues, to know that there's going to be a rise in the human trafficking situation.
Can we ask Lone Peak to mute it? I think that background
I think
noise.
it is. Yeah, well, why don't we go and see if Lone Peak has any questions?
Lone Peak, you guys have one?
Yeah, go ahead. So we're in a psychology class. What kind of psychological effects result from the victims?
Okay, fantastic question. Have you ever heard of something called Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, that a lot of times when someone is kidnapped or they're under someone else's control in a very violent way, the fear of that situation is so intense, and the only way people can survive it is they start bonding with the person that's abusing them. And they start believing that the person that's abusing them is somehow right, there's something wrong with them, that's the best they deserve. And then a lot of times when people get rescued, first thing they want to do is they want to run right back, to the brothel or to the mine or to the carpet factory where they were enslaved, because they have this Stockholm Syndrome. It's also called trauma bonding. And also, their self-esteem is just destroyed. Like, there's nothing worse for a human's identity than to be a slave, to have absolutely no control over, when you take a shower, what you eat, your sexuality, your body, or anything about your life. And that complete lack of control is just so devastating to a human being. So usually when people first get out, their first reaction, they are super angry, and they want to go right back to where they were. They want to go back to a situation that, horrible as it was, they got used to it, and it was comfortable for them. And we were talking about this yesterday at the conference. Over time, the anger goes down, and you start to behave like a normal teenager, and they might actually be feeling pretty good and seeming to be pretty good. But there's still something inside them that's really broken. Their self-esteem's really, really low. And in order for them to move forward and to be healed, they have to address what happened to them, and they have to be able to look at it. But when they first do, they're horrified, because they've kind of normalized it. They've gotten used to it, and that's allowed them to survive. So when they, through counseling, have to confront what really happened and really just how horrible that was, then they freak out. But once that's kind of, they hopefully are given the support they need to move through that, then you really start to see a great recovery. And in my experience working with survivors in India, that whole process takes about 2 years. And not that it's all fixed after that, people still have to work through their issues, but the extreme trauma, the trauma bonding, the anger, and then the feeling a little bit better, and then having to go way down again as they really, really confront what happened, is about a 2-year process. Great question. Do you guys have any other questions?
Yeah, actually. What types of laws does India have against the type of slavery that you described, or is it just generally accepted down there?
That's really changed. It's a fantastic question. That's really changed a lot in the 10 years that I've been working in this. seriously, when I first went to India and started working on this issue there, it was about 7 years ago, and I was on an airplane with a member of the Indian FBI, and he was really interested in what I did, and I explained this is why I'm in India and this is what I'm doing. He seemed supportive. And then at the end of the 1 hour flight, he says, well, it's great work you're doing. I'm so glad we don't have that problem in India. And I was like, what? We just talked about it for an hour, but that was the extent of the denial, that people really did not want to look at it. And even in the United States, when I first started working on this, my friends, I'd say I'm working against human trafficking, and people would say, you mean drug trafficking? No, human trafficking. And they'd be, you mean traffic accidents? I'm like, no, human trafficking. But thankfully, people have really, we all know what it is now. It's on CSI every week, which is great. We have more awareness. And governments around the world, including India, have really improved. So where you used to get convictions, you would never get convictions of traffickers, or if you did, it would be like 2 months of sentencing. And they basically, killed 100 people because so many people would come back with HIV/AIDS and other diseases and wouldn't even survive. So they basically murdered people, and yet they were getting a sentence like two months or nothing. And that was awful. It was so devastating for the survivors to go through a court case and not get a conviction. That's really, really improved. More and more you're seeing life sentences, long sentences, better services for survivors, but we still have a really long way to go. But it is completely illegal, and everywhere in the world slavery is illegal. And India also has, like we have here, specific laws protecting children from slavery and from sexual exploitation, for profit.
Okay.
Let's move back over to Bozeman. There's a few more kiddos over there. And also, I'm wondering, Lone Peak, if you could maybe mute your microphone, because then we're getting a little bit of feedback from you, and then when it's your turn to speak again, we'll have you
Unmute it.
Yeah.
Bozeman, you guys got anything more for me?
I'm wondering if you're having psychologists work with the survivors so they can get through that process in an efficient and good way, I guess.
Our organization, we definitely do have an intense amount of counseling. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of variety around the world in this. And in some cases, countries are, so poor and the charities are so, underfunded that basically, no, they're not getting any counseling, and people just kind of have to muddle through on their own. And some people are able to do it, and cope, and other people without counseling really just end up going back into situations. They just can't, can't make it work in the world. They can't make their life work. So it really is essential. But in a lot of cases, especially in the state-run shelter homes, there's no counseling, there's no education, there's no job training. It's really just removing someone from the situation, throwing them back out in the world, and hoping they do better. And unfortunately, a lot of times that just does not work. People need, in my opinion, not just one type of counseling, but like a lot of types of counseling to have, talking it through, processing actually what happened, maybe some human rights and training where they can just really learn about the laws and understand how to protect yourself, as well as maybe some art therapy, dance therapy, yoga, and some different kinds of physical things that helps you to process what's happened, because what's happened has happened to you physically. So you can talk about it to a certain extent, but you also really need a physical way to work through it. So we've had a lot of success with dance, yoga, martial arts, really just allowing people to kind of, not to necessarily talk about trafficking, but to just do those things and allow that to be a healing process. It's a good question.
Are there
Yes.
specific locations in the world or like forms of trafficking that should be like prioritized for others?
Yeah,
When
I think obviously every country should take responsibility for what's happening within their own borders. But if we're looking at it, as a whole global issue, there's 3 areas in the world that are the hardest hit. And those are Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia. And so that's like India, Nepal, and as well as Cambodia and Thailand, and Vietnam and Laos. Those, just have a much larger number of victims. And the other one is Eastern Europe. Russia's a bad problem, Moldova, Ukraine, wherever there's poverty, wherever there's a lack of opportunities, lack of jobs, people start by their own choice wanting to migrate to bigger cities from small towns. And when they do that, they no longer have the protection of their family or community. They're kind of out there on their own. And that is a huge, huge way that trafficking happens. Like you hear the case you think about is someone being taken off the street in their hometown and they, drugged and they wake up somewhere else as a slave. That happens for sure. But what's way more common is people who, like one of my girls, she was about 15, her mother got sick, she wanted to support her mother. So she went to the big city and she was able to get a job there, but she was so vulnerable there. I mean, she was a 15-year-old kid alone in the city, and so she was trafficked by her landlord. And so a lot of times the people will start the process of migrating or emigrating for their own choice, but then once they get there, unless there's, protections built in, a lot of times those people get trafficked. And then you have an added problem. You might not have the language where that can really be isolating. You might not trust the police, or the police might be really corrupt. So it's so difficult, in that situation for someone to just walk away. Even if they're not being kept under lock and key, the lock and key just might be the situation and the circumstances.
What's the best way to prevent trafficking?
I think two things. Well, three. I'm actually going to say three things. One is I think we need a lot more awareness at a younger age. I think it's awesome that you guys are doing this and getting this awareness, and hopefully it'll spread amongst your school and what have you. I'd say go even younger. Middle school, we had a bunch of middle schoolers come yesterday to the event. 5th grade, 6th grade, and in certain parts of the world, it needs to be even younger. Really giving people a lot of awareness. And then, okay, it's one thing to be aware trafficking is a problem. You need some tools to protect yourself. So if you're going to go for a job in another city, that maybe there could be hotlines you could call to check it out. Websites that would help you to understand if this is a safe situation. I think having at airports and border crossings, having a lot of posters and signs, and also educators, like survivors or other people who are there at those borders and at those airports, be able to talk to people, have booths set up where young people can go and just get more information. And then I think, especially in countries where, where there's a lot of people being trafficked, but there's also people who might grow up and exploit other people, to educate them as well, to educate boys and men, understand you should never go to a brothel. You might think someone's there of their own accord, but they're not. And giving this kind of education, I think you kind of have to start really young to try to change people's attitudes, especially, if something's become normal within a society. Trying to educate adults is hard. I think we should start younger. And then the other way I think is very important is to just work on this poverty. Areas where you have a very vulnerable group, that's a great place to go ahead and put in some prevention, some opportunities, better education, job opportunities, programs for youth, to be able to, so people, once they know, okay, this is the risk, but they also have some kind of other choice of what to do with their life. What do you guys think? What do you think is the best way to prevent it? I'd love to hear from some of you about that question.
Also, I just want to say that if Lone Peak, if you guys have something to say, raise your hand and we'll pull you into this conversation too. We'll make it more of a back and forth between the two schools.
Yeah. Lone Peak, what do you guys think we should do about prevention?
Don't be so shy.
I
think, awareness, I think, is a really big part of helping to fight it. Like, making sure people know what's going on and what can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And ways to prevent it, yeah.
I think that's definitely a huge part. Yeah.
Do you guys think that some of the awareness, like tools and like commercials or pamphlets you see, do you think they speak to kids, or do you think they're corny, or how do you think? What do you think is the best way to present? Is it best to present it through like a fictional film or a pamphlet, or like what works? What gets through to teens?
What would make you aware?
Honestly, something that would make me aware is I love it when there's issues going on like in the world, and they take it into a more like you see these movies that they make every day, that are based on a worldwide issue to catch viewers' attention, and then afterwards they bring up the fact of the actual fact of what is going on. And personally, to me, I always find it interesting if something's going on in the world and I didn't know about it, and then I see that there's this like excuse me, new film that came out, and I go to watch it, and then I find out all about this event, and I immediately, as soon as I'm done watching that movie, I'm wanting to know more about it. I'm looking into it. So I think that's something that is definitely good for teenagers, at least.
Like a documentary?
Yeah, like a very good documentary. Personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Documentaries. And what about like fiction films? Like, do you think fiction films can be a good way also, or do you think documentaries actually more straight to the point?
Yeah, I feel like fiction films would work as well. It would be like, it would be kind of more of like you have to sort of kind of figure out what the issue is at hand, as opposed to like a documentary telling you straight out like this is what's going on. But I feel like either way would work. To me, personally,
I think you know, you guys are a psychology class, so you'll find this interesting. But there was this really big anti-trafficking effort in, I think it was Romania, and it was like nationwide. You know, all the schools, and it was like documentaries, pamphlets, teacher trainings and curriculum and everything like that for the kids. And then they tested it, and all the kids were like, that was so stupid, because they knew about it, but they somehow didn't believe it would happen to them. You know, it was really difficult for them to accept that what was happening to those girls in the film. It was also very overdramatic. You know, it was like lots of pictures of girls like with their hands tied and bruised on their face, and I think sometimes that kind of extreme isn't as effective, because a lot of people, again, will look at that and be like, that's ridiculous, that's never going to happen. You know, so I think if it's presented in a little bit more rational way that's calmer, that might be more effective for teenagers in particular.
Yeah, I feel like if people make things too dramatic, it seems exactly that. It's too dramatic, like you're overselling it. That only happens in like horror movies. Like my teacher just mentioned the meth commercials that we get out here, where they have like bugs crawling out of your skin and stuff. And it's like, I understand that like meth is a bad drug and bad stuff can happen to you, but it feels a little extreme sometimes what they do to try to warn us.
Yeah, I think kids get turned off of that. It's not effective.
Well, what I think the cross the borderline is there's a difference between advertising something and talking about how difficult it is, or getting to the point where it's unrealistic, and you're watching that and you can tell that it's just it's not an actual. You're stretching it too far. You're taking it way longer than it needs to be.
Yeah, and again, I think it turns people off, and they end up deciding that's never going to happen. I'm not even listening to you anymore. So back to Bozeman, what ideas do you guys have for prevention? What do you think would be most effective in your community?
Probably having like survivors speak. I mean, I know that's really hard to do, but I find that I'm most effective when someone that I can see is telling me, and I can talk to them or learn from them, like in person or like this.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. It is difficult with survivors because a lot of times they don't want to talk about it, especially if it was involved with prostitution or sexual exploitation. But still, if there are a few that do, and I think that it's incredibly powerful, and especially if you can see someone like you and you're like, oh my gosh, it really did happen to this person and kind of looks like me from a similar background, helps us all to understand, you know, obviously can happen to anybody. I mean, there are situations that make people more vulnerable, but any one of us at different points in our life could be in one of those situations. And so I think it's good. What do you guys think about like educating guys around this issue? And do you feel like that needs a different approach, or do you feel like same approach for women or men?
I don't think it needs a different approach. I know personally I don't see it differently than most women. I mean,
right. So you see it as a human issue, not like a male-female issue, particularly.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I mean, like you mentioned, there's different like trafficking, and I was kind of aware of that there's probably still some labor trafficking out there, and that was probably a little more male focused, and then the child soldiers was a little more focused on males too. So I mean, I guess I think again, just survivors speaking can really impact well a lot more than maybe a film can, or like that can still be impactful. But I think if you have someone like you're in someone's presence that has happened to, that's a lot more effective. And really,
Yeah, I agree.
like,
And with labor, maybe people would be a little bit more willing to talk about it because it's not quite so, stigmatized as when it's something like brothel trafficking. I know in my state, I'm from Florida, and we've had a lot of agricultural trafficking, a lot of trafficking, particularly with like strawberries and tomatoes, and people that again they probably came voluntarily to the United States, usually from Mexico, or Guatemala, and they came looking for a better life, expecting to, earn a fair wage. And what happens is then they get, stuck in a situation where they're trafficked, they're not being paid anything. Usually at first it promises, like, you'll get paid in a year, or 2 years, just work another year and then you'll get paid, and then they never do. And also with a lot of threats of violence or actual violence against a person. And speaking to the boy-girl issue, like there's certain types in India, certain types of slavery which, typically have been mostly boys. And one of them, which is a really serious problem, is rug factories. And that's, there are girls involved in it, but it's primarily boys. And it used to affect about 600,000 Indian children at any one time. But this is a really good story in terms of hopefulness. Is there's this one organization called BBA in India, and they started working very focused intensively on this issue about 15 years ago, and now they've got the number of kids down to 300,000, which, I mean, it's still way too many kids, but like it's half as many, so it's a huge improvement. And a lot of that was about awareness, because the parents in the villages would be told, your kid's going to school, or he's going to work and go to school. And there was no school. I mean, they were literally working 12 hours a day. A friend of mine actually did a rescue for some kids in a carpet factory, and when he went and picked up all the kids, and he had them in his car and was taking them to the shelter home, and there was this little girl named Asha, and he put out some bananas in the car, which is, super common fruit in India, like even more common than here, something everybody has. And she was like, what is this potato? What kind of potato is it? I've never seen this shape of potato. And she was trying to eat it without, peeling it. And he was just like horrified. But this is how limited their life was, in slavery. Like literally they just ate potatoes and rice every day for 10 years. And, she was like 12 or 14 and didn't even know, how to peel the banana. Super intense. Do you guys have any,
I see a hand in Bozeman.
Another hand in Bozeman.
I have a question about the social aspects of it. Do you ever run into a situation when you approach a group and they just socially accept it as part of their culture, and they don't really necessarily accept and look at you as more of an intruder compared to somebody who's trying to help?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. There's usually a good, maybe not the entire community, but some amount of acceptance of it, even among people who are oppressed themselves. But like I say, people in order to survive, people normalize their situation. And for example, there's one group we work with in northern India, and when I was talking about bonded labor and people who are, debt labor, slavery, they, some of them have been trapped in this for 20 years. You have grandparents, parents, and kids working as slaves for decades, and they are offended at first, when someone comes in and says, you don't have to do this, this is slavery, you're being exploited, because, they've accepted it, and it's like sort of embarrassing or like really, really upsetting to realize that what you've been doing for all these years is illegal, that you've actually been exploited, that you've been enslaved, and it really takes some time to, very gently and very respectfully, and also the big role of other survivors playing a role in helping, their peers, survivors or victims in that case, to understand, this isn't, you don't have to do this, and but there's a huge resistance at first, and then like in the red light area, there's a lot of people profiting a lot from human trafficking. So it's a $32 billion a year business. So you have to be kind of careful, because there's an element that really does not want you there, and you have to be smart about it and not just go marching around alone in the red light area at night, because you probably get like a knife in your back because it's that you are interfering with their livelihood.
So these guys have to go to their next class, but thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions from the remote kids?
So we did have one, and it had to do with fair trade.
Okay.
And how much, like paying attention to fair trade, how much is that actually helping to prevent human trafficking?
I think fair trade's a really good, actually important, has an important role to play. And whenever you have the opportunity to buy fair trade coffee or fair trade chocolate, you should, because you're ensuring that there's no slavery and there's no child labor in the product that you're eating. And I personally don't like eating other people's suffering. I don't like wearing it on my body. So really trying to look for fair trade alternatives, but also with like brands you like, taking a moment to email them or whatever and let them know that you as a customer would like to have fair trade options, within your favorite brands of clothing or food or whatever. Because obviously, they want to keep their customers happy. And the millennial generation, you guys, the first generation really to really deeply care about these issues in a very broad way. So I feel like we're about to see some really big changes as your generation kind of gets to the age where you have a lot of buying power and starts putting pressure on companies, to get the slavery and the child labor out of the supply chain of their products. So we got some good times ahead. That's a really good question.
Oh.
You're speaking, but we can't hear you because you're muted. Are you asking a question?
He had a comment. I think I was just asking if he still wanted to try to make it.
Yeah, I can go ahead and make it. A little while ago, you were talking about the whether or not you felt if it was a overall issue or kind of a boy-girl issue, like and personally, my opinion of that is I think it does come down to kind of a boy-girl issue because, and I think it depends on the type of slavery, such as like those that are being sent and they're working in brothels. Obviously, that would be more sensitive to women than a guy, because a guy, guys aren't put in that situation. They can't obviously relate it. And then you were talking about a while ago about the boys that have to work into did you say rug factory, I think? What you said?
Right.
Then obviously that issue would be more sensitive to us guys than it would be to the girls. Even though there are some girls working in that, it would obviously be more sensitive to us because it's the majority of guys are being put in that situation. So I think it does kind of come down to the type of slavery that is being discussed, because obviously if you're focusing on the one type of slavery, which in this case we'll just say the brothel, obviously you're going to get more of a feminine response, I guess you could say. More
right.
Going to be into more of the guys, because they're not totally, they know the issue, but some guys may be looking at, well, that's more of a kind of a girl issue that's going on. It's not really affecting us at this point. And then but if you bring the guys issue as well, then you're going to get kind of more of an overall viewpoint at slavery in general, is what I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. What were you going to say? What do you think?
I was just curious of like what the kind of ratio is between girls who are getting trafficked and boys who are getting trafficked.
I honestly don't think we have those statistics. It's certainly within sexual exploitation is a lot more girls. There are, girls and women. There are some boys, and there's certain parts of the world where boys are actually more targeted for that kind of exploitation. But mostly worldwide, definitely a much larger number of girls. But in terms of, labor trafficking and mining and stuff like that, obviously more men. So I think that would be a really important area for research, just to understand, more about who's being trafficked. And it's a criminal industry, so it's not so easy to study, but more about who's being trafficked, and not just their gender, but maybe more facts about, exactly where they're coming from and what were the backgrounds and the factors. I feel like actually the whole area of human trafficking needs a lot more research and even more statistics to help us understand, how to fight it. Because you can't fight it if you don't really know your enemy.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We have to go to class as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed that. Bye.
Thank you.